So, now we will zoom in on adaptation. And as you will all know, the more climate change accelerates, the higher and the bigger the need for more adaptation and resilience. It is an absolutely must. So how to do that and how to integrate this aspect stronger now? That is what we are going to discuss in this session. And to start us off, before we take the conversation, we will have two different takes on this topic. And the first one, we will hear from Kunle Adeyemi, a Nigerian architect, designer, and development researcher, and also a thought leader in this whole field. Kunle Adeyemi's, whose work has zoomed in on interventions that make communities more resilient. I think that many of you will be familiar with the Makoko floating school, which has now turned into a Makoko floating system. But Kunle Adeyemi has also worked closely with Rem Koolhaas at Office for Metropolitan Architecture when he led the design of projects such as Shenzhen Stock Exchange Tower in China, the National Library of Qatar, and Qatar Foundation's headquarters in Doha, just to mention a few. I think we're all quite keen to welcome on stage Kunle Adeyemi. Please.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here, such an important event. I would like to just share a little bit of my experience and practice in the last 12 years. And of course, Connie has mentioned my background in architecture at the Office for Metropolitan Architecture and also for the last, I would say, 20 years or 25 odd years now. But Nle is essentially a practice focused on development of cities and communities, and what we really stand for is building a bridge and really promoting diversity and coexistence between humanity and the environment. And we see architecture really as an interface between those two entities, where we hold both almost in equal terms. So our projects somewhat tend to work within the space of bridging the relationships between humanity and the environment. We've most recently sort of shifted our focus on by maybe separating the two things that we do. We work essentially on land, of course, and also on water, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But we've done a variety of projects, of course, in different parts of the world, from really small scale, like furniture, to, let's say, more medium scale projects. We've had the opportunity to develop a project here in Denmark, which is on its second iteration for the Roskilde Festival, and it's called Platform. It's really a performance stage with the walls that move. And again, to us, that's sort of how does architecture be a little bit more human? How can it move? How can it dance? And sort of bridge that relationship between performance and space. Prior to that, we had done the same thing in New York for Prelude to the Shed. So sort of this is the second or third iteration of the same thing. So there's also the idea of innovating through iterations and improvements, but not as opposed to seeing architecture as a static, let's say, singular act of perfection. We also do competitions. Some we win, some we lose. And installations in London and quite a little bit of work going on in Africa. This is a school called Black Rhino Academy in Karatu in Tanzania, where it's just built with local materials, earth, and we're working with the UN Ops. We've just completed some buildings for the Hurricane Idai recovery program. So it's a series of educational and health facilities, essentially really sort of resistant buildings. And this is actually another building under construction. And it's a school hall for Black Rhino, which I mentioned earlier. But the simplicity of how can you do somewhat of a complex building with very simple means, and very simple means as such as just doing these sort of catenary arches by just hanging a chain and just working around it in a very remote area. So my practice following OMA was really, how do you bring the sort of knowledge and experience from very high-end opportunities and architecture into very simple environments? How can we achieve maximum impact with minimum means? So on the other, let's say, flip side of our work is sort of a sister brand called Water Cities, which we focus on the relationship between human life and water. And Water Cities is a brand focused on innovating human life on and around water. And the history, the background of this is really around the idea or based on the premise that we realize that cities are sinking, and in the very near future we believe people will live largely on and around water, and African cities will really be at the heart of this change. And this began about 12 years ago when I was researching affordable housing in Nigeria and Lagos, and I thought, if you're trying to solve the problem of affordable housing, you need to kind of learn and understand from people who are building some of the, let's say, cheapest dwellings in the city. And it turns out that the community of Makoko, which is, technically called a slum, with over 70,000 people living on and around water, in really, let's say, poorly constructed houses, nonetheless quite innovative, stilt construction, timber frame construction. And they built thousands of homes with very minimum means. And we realized we could learn from them and improve on that from something as simple as this, where they seem to have everything in a structure like this that they've built with very, very limited resources. And that if we could improve on this and solve some of their challenges, we might have an insight into the challenges of our future as a human civilization. And that led to the project which was called Makoko Floating School. And it was a school, but really as an incidental program. The project was funded under the Africa Adaptation Program by the UNDP and the Federal Ministry of the Environment, specifically as a prototype for building on and around water, where we had seen at the time that we're not only dealing with the challenges of rapid urbanization, but the big problem that we're encountering, climate change. So if you imagine 12 years ago in architecture field in Lagos, in Nigeria, we stumbling upon the fact that the issue of climate is a big problem, and now trying to tackle that by building a structure with a community that was already living in what seemed to be a climate adapted, perhaps a net zero community already, and trying to just improve it. So this was built with the community, of course, with nothing more complicated than a hand drill. If you imagine a 3-floor floating structure, you'll be quite hard pressed to find even a 3-floor floating structure today, not to mention in a community like Makoko with very scarce means. This led to, so it was a prototype that we saw how it was used, abused, and even really so it's sort of tested to its sort of maximum capacity, and we learned a lot from it. We learned from its successes and also its failures, and moved that into a second iteration in 2016 for the Venice Architecture Biennale, where we turned it into a prefabricated system, and then we had another opportunity in Bruges to constantly improve it. It's engineered to Euro codes as one system. And then in China, in 2018, we decided to scale this up, and we turned it into 3 modular sizes, a small, medium, and a large, all tethered around a floating platform. In a way, it's always been this sort of innovative process of iteration as you do in product design. You start from a minimum viable product and you see how it works and you continue to improve upon it. Our latest version is in Mindelo in Cabo Verde, which is a more permanent structure, and it's used as a floating music hub. It consists of a performance space in the middle, which is a large prototype, or the large structure. The medium is a state-of-the-art recording studio, and the small is a service bar, all sort of within that space. We had the opportunity to do an installation recently, which is still there in Rotterdam, which we call MFS2R. So this is actually the 6th version of the Makoko floating system in 6 countries on 3 continents. By iterating this, we've been able to test just one building system out of, let's say, hundreds of solutions that we think are important for developing this idea of water cities, where we hope to build various systems, not just floating structures. This is actually the version from Venice, which we had disassembled and stored for 7 years, and in a flat packed, and we just reassembled it, and we took half of it and we installed it in the pond in Rotterdam, and the other half is sort of created this platform. So again, this idea of how to reuse, recycle a building, store a building, and adapt it for different purposes. Finally, we've just been fortunate to publish a book which is called the African Water Cities, and it's really a sort of a compendium of work on this subject matter in the last 12 years, where again it's really about the issue of climate change and looking at various cities, of course, that we know now that a large majority of our cities, nearly 80% of all cities, major cities, are by waterfronts, with nearly 50% of the human population living there, with most of them in Asian and African cities. It's an interesting documentation with artwork, AI, imagery. There's research on various cities and communities along, and then there's a section focused on a multidisciplinary approach of research called Decima, looking at demographics, economics, social politics, infrastructure, morphology, environment, and resources as a way of really doing urban analysis of various African cities. We have contributions from a number of writers, that have written really extensive, interesting topics on African cities. And we've also done several research, several analysis on top 20 African cities that are at the intersection of the issues of rapid urbanization and climate change. And also, it also contains a number of projects that we're just highlighting to show the climate adaptation efforts that are going on all around Africa, from small projects to old projects, from water harvesting to vegetational control efforts. And of course, we also have a lot of beautiful imagery of what life is already happening on and around water in African cities and communities. I would really would love to discuss and share with you more on this subject matter. I think the critical message that we have here to share is really that there is the continent of Africa is changing and is being shaped by, of course, the urban and demographic trends, which is Africa being one of the fastest growing continents, but also one of the most affected by climate impact, and that there needs to be immediate action to deal with this change. And we're really at the heart of it, and we would love to welcome everybody to be part of this movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kunle Adeyemi, and we will come back to that, and also very strong statements on how Africa is not just adapting and changing, but it's also because it's very much affected as a continent. The next speaker we will hear from is Joachim Schellnhuber, also known as John Schellnhuber. Welcome, John, onto the stage. John Schellnhuber is one of the world's most respected and influential climatologists. Actually, he was the founding director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, ladies and gentlemen, 30 years ago. So it's just when sometimes some people sound as if it's new to them, this climate change challenge. There were people who actually founded a research institute to try to look at the impacts 30 years ago. So that is what you are still very much keeping you busy, also as emeritus there now, John. But you're also involved in Bauhaus Earth, which has a mission to transform building and human settlements from being what creates some of the change we do not want to try to be a positive driving force. We're very keen to listen to your presentation. Please, take it away.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to be here, in particular at an event where an absolute leader like Kunle here, I was fascinated to see and listen to his presentation. And my eminent friend, Connie Hedegaard, is being the moderator. So in a way, I will tell you now why Kunle is making all these efforts, why we have this climate problem actually, and it's quite scary. So the title is Climate Change in the Built Environment. That's not a surprise. And when I use a phrase I coined a long time ago, also avoiding the unmanageable and managing the unavoidable. So avoiding the unmanageable means keeping global warming to a level we can still arrange with and can adapt to, while there is a level we cannot adapt to actually. And managing the unavoidable is precisely keeping up with the still manageable climate change. So that's the thing. So let me start with this picture, and that reminds me of this Bella Center here, because this is the final stage of the Conference of the Parties in Paris 2015, where you know that the 2 degrees target was more or less turned into international law. And there is also this ambition level, keeping global warming between the famous 1.5 degrees. I'll tell you in a second why this makes sense. But this reminds me of this very hall here, because I was here a long time ago in 2009, as was Connie. That was the infamous COP15 in Copenhagen, which collapsed. So I was here in this very hall in the final night, where the attempt to extend the Kyoto Protocol into a legally binding system of targets and timetables completely collapsed in this very room. So actually, when I left the room, I said, I will never return to this place. So I was so frustrated, as many others. Here I am, and we talk about a new positive vision of the future. So why below 1.5 degrees, or at least 2 degrees? This is a map I introduced a long time ago, also at a lecture I gave at Oxford University. It's about the so-called tipping elements in the Earth system. So what are the vital organs of the planet? And I've shown this before in Copenhagen. The interesting thing is the small legend you can read at the top, at the bottom right corner. If you find an orange circle here on the map, this means this is an element like the Greenland ice sheet, which may become destabilized already below 2 degrees. If you look around the map, you will find 6 circles. These are all the places where between 1.5 and 2 degrees disruptive change may happen. It includes, unfortunately, the tropical coral reef, like the Great Barrier Reef, which will just die back between 1.5 and 2 degrees. Unfortunately, we are absolutely certain about this. Greenland ice sheet, which holds frozen water equivalent to 7-meter global sea level rise, still in the balance, but clearly beyond 2 degrees, it will be destabilized. And you can imagine what will happen to Denmark under these circumstances. Lagos will be gone completely, of course, as will be many other cities. So, and there are sort of interactions. If you melt down Greenland, it will have an impact on the so-called Gulf Stream system. This will change the climatology of the Amazon rainforest. And we just discovered in a paper recently published in Nature that the Amazon rainforest is directly connected to the snow cover of the Tibetan Plateau, which is the highest plateau in the world, 4,000 meters high. And the snow cover on the Tibetan Plateau is directly influenced by the subsistence of the Amazon rainforest. It's fascinating, but it's extremely scary what is going on here. So just to give you the flavor, the Greenland ice sheet, that's the upper right corner, lost 1 million tons of ice in 2019 per minute. So this is something, the biggest freshwater flow on Earth. So just show you a few glimpses of the world if all the ice would melt, actually, including the East Antarctic ice sheet. And so you see there's nothing left from Denmark, actually, a little bit of Sweden. The half of England will disappear. That's the revenge for Brexit, of course. And also the Crimean will become a tiny island here. So you can go through this. Florida is gone. All the major cities in the Asian world will disappear. And I could show you also a map of Africa where the Gulf of Guinea, of course, would be completely swamped. Now, what is more worrying, because what I showed you here will take hundreds of years, maybe millennia, but what will happen by the end of this century is, if everything which has been implemented already in policies, climate policy around the world, we will, by the end of this century, have 2.7 degrees warming. If all the political measures will be 100% implemented, and you know political measures never become 100% implemented, maybe 50%, maybe not at all. Under these circumstances, all the hedged parts in the upper map, so you see in the inner tropics in particular, will become uninhabitable by the combination of temperature and humidity. I mean, virtually uninhabitable. You would not survive without air conditioning in this place. And that means altogether, under this 2.7 degrees warming, which is currently the political option, 1/3 of human population will be pushed out of the habitability niche. I mean, can you really imagine that we would relocate 2 to 3 billion people on this planet within this century in peace, without war, without bloodshed? It's absolutely impossible. Huh? I mean, we will end up with hundreds of millions of people who have to move across the planet because of the still manageable global warming. And for that, we need this adaptation strategies, floating systems, and so on. But if this happens, game over. So I show you just what is going on, and maybe you are aware of that, but I think very few people are aware. So I looked at the newspaper this morning and thought, this is some sort of breaking news, you know, New York Times, Washington Post, and so on, Guardian, about what is going on in the atmosphere right now. So this is global warming as it develops over the last 20 years, and it's a curve, it's going up, but you have wiggles, you have El Nino events when it gets a little bit warmer. But here is the really scary thing. So this is what you can look up yourself. There's a website by the University of Maine called Climate Reanalyzer, and every day you can find global mean temperature, every day really. You can find sea surface temperature, sea ice content. This is what happened till July the 2nd. The black line is 2023. So June was above all previous historical measures. But what happened yesterday, the 4th of July, you know, fireworks, celebrations, and so on. At that time, yesterday, global mean warming went above 17 degrees, actually to 17.18 degrees, which is completely unprecedented. That is half a degree above what happened before. So July will become the hottest month ever, but yesterday was the hottest day on Earth ever measured. This should be breaking news. Huh? Nobody, no journal is even taking care of that. Huh? So we are hitting the wall and we are even accelerating our velocity, and nobody takes care of it. Nobody pays attention. Do you pay attention? You, sir? While you check your emails, the world is going down the drain, and we experience it live. Why? Because it's not just the atmosphere, you know, that is absorbing the excess heat. It is in particular the oceans. The oceans absorb 95% of the extra energy we import through the enhanced greenhouse effect. And if you look now to the heat content here in the oceans, the upper 2,000 meters, we have buoys, we have satellites, we can look at all these things. It's going up and up and up. And you know, once you have heated water, you cannot get rid of the heat immediately. You cannot get rid of 2,000 meters of global heating stored in the oceans, not overnight. So this is a problem. So even the oceans are now going beyond anything we have experienced before. Huh? So this is from the same reanalyzer covered by the Guardian here. The black line is the ocean surface temperature this year, and it's gone off the charts completely. So it seems that this year is the year where climate disruption becomes evident for everybody. Yeah? We have warned about this a long time ago. Connie, you know, we talked about it. Could there be even something like runaway greenhouse effect? And this year is actually telling us very bad messages about it. So, this means, you know, in every lecture, you have just one slide where you have to pay attention. So you have to pay attention now, I tell you. Huh? This is my assistance for you. So on the horizontal axis, you see the timeline, of course, so 1900 to year 2000. And on the vertical axis, it's delta global mean temperature. So that's what we call global warming above pre-industrial levels. You see 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees. That's the situation right now without what is happening this year, by the way. This year, we will probably for some time even breach the 1.5 degrees already. Yeah? And this is under business as usual, what will happen, which would create all these tipping processes I've shown you before. So it would become an unmanageable global environment. So we have to avoid it. And don't fool yourself, we will not keep the 1.5 degrees line. And we won't keep the 2 degrees line either. We will overshoot it. The only possible scenario in line with the laws of physics, I'm a physicist by training, and this is my Bible, the laws of physics. And it's very hard to breach them. So the only positive scenario is overshooting. In a sense, let's try to keep the excursion beyond 2 degrees as flat, as short as possible. Let's hope that some of his tipping dynamics will not be instigated yet, but we have to bring down global warming within this century, hopefully in the next century. And this can only be done by so-called negative emissions. That is the only formula to save the world. And this is not pathetic, this is the reality. And this means we have to remove carbon from the atmosphere again, but not by geoengineering and not by wacky sort of carbon capture and storage systems, which are much too expensive and cannot be scaled. We have to do it by turning the built environment into a carbon storage system, by using timber, bamboo, all types of hybrid materials and so on, as have been used. By the way, when you saw the floating schools by Kunle here, why were they not built from concrete? Well, concrete will sink. That's how the mafia disposes their enemies. They don't do it with timber, actually. There's a reason behind that. So negative emissions means reforesting the planet. We have 1 billion hectares of degraded land in Africa, in Asia, even in Europe, in the Mediterranean. We have to reforest. And we have to create a permanent flow of harvested biomass, which we use to turn our cities into stored biomass, actually, where we can, like a pump, increase the sort of CO2 storage capacity. We published a paper on that in Nature Sustainability, which is cited like hell right now, buildings as a global carbon sink. And this is more or less the technical map for how to do it. So we have a plan. We can actually remove nature-based architecture, can remove many, many billions of tons of CO2 from the atmosphere by creating wealth, by creating housing, and as a side effect, actually repairing the atmosphere. That is our value proposition to the world. And I skip this, so I just go to what type of architecture will we have. So what Connie just showed you may become actually something which will scale across the world. We did a sort of big event in Venice recently at the Architecture Biennale, where we thought, what will become of vernacular architecture? You know, the architecture not created by the architects, but by the people living in a place who have stayed there, their families for hundreds of years, and you see a wonderful wealth of vernacular architecture. But this only works if the climate is stable for a few centuries. If the climate is changing every decade, how can you catch up? How can you improve or invent the best roof for the precipitation, or the air conditioning by using sort of adobe buildings or things like that? This is gone. It's too quick, actually, to become vernacular in the future. So we have turned, the few people on Earth who can afford it have turned to architecture. So that is tiny, tiny part of the world. But most of the people live like this. When I first seen this picture, I've been to Cairo many times, already in the 1970s. This is the biggest city in Africa. Lagos will overtake it very soon, as will Kinshasa and Dar es Salaam. This is contemporary Cairo, which was once the most beautiful city in the world. 20 million people living like this. Do you see any tree here? Is this sustainable? Is this inclusive? Is this beautiful? This is the reality of the many, not the few. What can we do about it? By the way, this helps to destroy the climate, but even if we would have no climate change effect, this would be a scandal, a social scandal, an aesthetic scandal. So we did a conference. I'm a member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, and so this is at the doorsteps of the Vatican Academy in the gardens behind St. Peter's Dome. And you see here Ursula von der Leyen. We did a book covering that. It's called Reconstructing the Future. And not reconstructing the past, that's the usual thing. The future we are heading for is not the future we want. So we have to reconstruct this future by changing our course. And by the way, we did this with Birkhäuser. You can download this for free. We got a license, so we had a sponsor. Everybody can download this book, and I certainly recommend that to you. And this includes, for example, you see here on the right, the gentleman next to the German Minister for Construction is Francis Carré, who gave a talk yesterday, I think, from Burkina Faso. And he was inspired because when we talk about climate adaptation, as Kunle has shown you with the floating constructions, he was inspired, Francis, by, a termite mound here. And actually turns out, and you can show this in scientific detail, this is the best climatized structure in the world, keeping temperature, CO2, humidity, and oxygen very constant over 24 hours, simply by the chimney effect. By design, this is a well-ventilated structure. And so this is the Burkina Faso Institute of Technology, modeled without any air conditioning after the termite mound here. You have the famous wind towers of Iran, where you combined wind energy and subterranean water. You can try to create sponge cities, and you have to work with timber. This is the famous pavilion from Heilbronn for a German exhibition. The exhibition has moved to a different city. What did they do? They dismantled this structure and rebuilt it again. You cannot do this with concrete and steel. So we have nature-based solutions. So my final remark is, before Connie cuts the microphone for me, this is, I came across this, so maybe I show you first the next one, the next slide. I was really flabbergasted when I read in Le Monde that France is now preparing for 4 degrees global warming, adaptation to 4 degrees. Who is doing this? I mean, have we never read anything? So we did a series for the World Bank a while ago, 2012, called Turn Down the Heat. And the subtitle is, Why a 4 degrees warmer world must be avoided. The limits to adaptation are somewhere between 2 degrees, 2.5 degrees. There is no way really, to adapt to a world which is substantially warmer. And even that will be a major challenge. It will be the biggest challenge in human civilization, actually. So, again, my summary is the built environment, the topic of this very congress here. This is the decisive element in the sustainability equation. If we keep on building and developing cities like we did after the Second World War, we will all be toast virtually, really. There's no way to keep global warming below any reasonable limit. But if we turn it into what we call regenerative architecture, including adaptive architecture, as Kunle showed you, the biggest climate villain can turn into the climate hero. And this is very important. This goes beyond climate neutrality. Think of the mobility sector. The mobility sector, in the end, if you have all electric cars and so on, can only become climate neutral. This is not good enough. We have to become climate positive. And the only big sector that can do it by turning into organic materials, to better structures of cities and so on, is the built environment sector. So let's all become heroes. Thank you.
Please, John, thank you very much. And now nobody in this hall at least can say that they did not hear the message, that they did not know. Very strong words. And I think also a question to you. Do you pay attention? We heard. And I just wondered, and I could start with you, Kunle, when we heard John mention this 1/3 of global population being in danger of having to move to somewhere else. And yet, with the built environment, you have to do things in a better way, in a smarter way. And then we saw the reality, the pictures from Cairo. You're yourself from Lagos. How to make the changes needed as fast as it is needed, while the pressure from population, for expansion, for continuing business as usual is as strong as ever. How are you coping with this double pressure, so to speak?
Yeah, it's a very serious pressure indeed. And I think what's interesting is that we live in a world now where the rate of growth of cities somehow has exceeded even the human life expectancy. So you can build a whole city now very quickly. I mean, 100 years ago, cities take 100 years to build, but now we're just producing cities. So there's a huge responsibility in I would say, first of all, of course, people here who are in the profession of the built environment to understand that when you do have that opportunity, that is really one of the first starting points of the responsibility. But we also know that architects, urban planners, designers have very limited decision-making capacity to a certain extent. So, policymakers, governments, larger institutions need to understand and need to empower, the agents to build differently, to think differently. So, but I think the education or the awareness starts from here also, and starts from the individuals. It's a lot of the science John has shown us things that we're now experiencing as day-to-day reality, whether they are the heat waves or the forest fires or flash floods. These are real signs. We're no longer in the days of 10, 20 years ago where there were skeptics about climate impact. So I think everyone has the responsibility to just begin to act whatever it is that you're doing.
And that goes for the investor community as well, I take it. Can you feel any difference there, or is it as difficult as it was 5, 10, 15 years ago to have this perspective integrated in the projects?
I think the awareness is increasing, but the economics of development is a huge vector, is a huge factor. And that's one of the reasons why in our work we quickly realized that design is not the most important part of development, right? That design is really just a tool. So as architects, we're usually very occupied with our interest in just designing the most beautiful, the most amazing, the most, whatever buildings, which is great, but you also need to have a much more multidisciplinary approach to thinking about architecture. You need to understand demographics, really what is driving change, and the growth of people has a huge impact on anything that we do, population growth, and that's why Africa, after Asia, is now becoming the next most important region in the world, because it has the youngest population, it has one of the highest growth rates. Then with demographics comes economic development. So you also need to understand the economic impact and how economics affects development. So I mean, we're always trained that form follows functions. So such a great idea, but form actually follows finance in a lot of ways. And the more you understand that as an architect, and you understand why the investors are making those decisions, and you can influence those decisions to meet them where they want their own triple bottom line, et cetera, and still make these environmental, social impacts, the better we are prepared to address those issues.
So, John, it's mindset changes, and it's also to change the whole culture and the tradition in such an area. You're writing down a lot of notes, so you want to say something.
Want me to read it out?
No, I just want you to
Okay.
comment.
No, I just wrote down this ingenious sentence Kunle just said, form follows finance. That's precisely what is happening, unfortunately, in architecture and so on, because to forget about the function, if it's a beautiful form and it is in a way flattering the financing person as an iconic building and so on, just forget about the function in the end. The other thing I wanted, also in response to what you asked, Kunle, so how can it be changed? So I'll do that a little bit later. But form follows function was also, if you like, the headline of the old Bauhaus movement. So the old Bauhaus movement was created in Weimar in Germany in 1919. Why? And why in Weimar? Because this was directly after the First World War, where parts of Europe were destroyed, and where the old elites came down. So the noble people and so on in Germany, in all places. And then a small group of enlightened architects, planners, artists, artisans and so on came together and said, let's look around the world and ask ourselves, how can we build a good housing environment for the many and not for the few?
Yeah.
How can we provide working people with good houses, with good apartments, with good streets and so on, and not just build for the elites? Because that was precisely what happened in England, in Germany, in France, everywhere across the old empires before the First World War. So these people like Walter Gropius and so on, and Mies van der Rohe and later Le Corbusier and so on, they took a new stance at the built environment. Now think of them being reborn today. When they would look around the world, they would look to Lagos and Jakarta and Bogota and so on, and Amsterdam and France, where you now see what is happening in the suburbs, where all the lower class people have been sort of stored away. I mean, they would think, and they see climate change and biodiversity loss and soil degradation and desertification across the world and social injustice. And they would ask themselves, We need a Bauhaus movement for the 21st century, of course. But now not for 2 billion people, but for very soon 10 billion people. It's an unprecedented challenge. And that brings me to the final thing, because in response to your question, who is bringing about the change, which has to be happening rapidly? I mean, we have to start now because it's a very long journey. And I think it has to do with what I call a lasagne theory. You know a lasagne, which is a nice Italian dish with different layers. So I think we can only bring about change if we have on the top, whatever you call it, enlightened leaders. Yes, you need a few of them at least. Most of our decision makers are not very enlightened, but I will not name any specifically. But we always have a few enlightened. When you need civil society to have a discourse, civil society needs to make clear we need change, we need rapid change, and we want to be part of it. Against this, you cannot bring about transition, not even in an autocracy or a dictatorship, not in the long run. But in between, you have the layer of creative people who have to adopt this, who have to create the narratives, how to make the change. These are the architects, the urban planners, the designers, the painters, the musicians, and so on, the creative people. And they have to stand up from their easy chairs and not just deliver to the wealthy people wonderful, iconic buildings, wonderful quarters and cities. No, they have to deliver that to civil society. And only if these three layers work together, and I see what is happening here at this World Congress is the inner layer, so to speak, the creative layer. Only if these layers work together, we have a chance. And actually, my personal, if I'm asked, what is the chance to really bring about the change rapidly enough, I think it's only 20% or something. But since everything is at stake, 20% is a good chance.
Okay, and we can see from your body language that you are not too hopeful that we will actually fulfill that. But both John and Kunle, I would like to challenge you on one thing, because you're both preoccupied with social injustice and social justice, and that's also very clear in your projects, that is very much built into that. But when you mentioned the Bauhaus movement, John, and go back, the materials used today, the value change we have today, the business models we have today, the industrialization, I mean, that is all sort of, that has developed because price, cheap price was the overriding consideration. And there is a social dimension of that as well. So Kunle, how to work with this novel way of doing things? Normally when you do new things, it can never compete price-wise, or can it, with the industrialized processes that have been there for a long time. So how to align social justice and then the more ideal thing that we are talking about here?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think in our work, what we do is that we try to get the inspiration from not just our experiences as professionals that have also had the opportunity to work in very industrialized environments, in some of the most high-tech projects and large-scale construction, complex buildings, but to really look at people who are building every day with, buildings, who are, let's say, the 90% or 99%, so to speak. And I think those are really the drivers of the human evolution, the vernacular architecture, as John called it, because they are really the ingenious people looking at what is available, looking at what is local. And I think there's a lot to learn from that. There's a lot to learn from areas where there's scarcity of, let's say, resource or technology as we know it in more civilized or more industrialized environments. But really, just looking at very, very simple communities and what they are already doing, the materials that they have access to, how they are constituting those materials to create an environment, and then sort of bring that back into our own working culture. So, first of all, it's to sort of unlearn our high expectations of what architecture should be, and learning from the environment and learning from people, everyday people. Because ultimately that really accounts for this shift that we're trying to make. So a community like Makoko with, 70,000 people building on water, building with building with no infrastructure, no, high technology, but they're still able to build homes, more than 2,000 units of what becomes vernacular water architecture. To us is incredibly inspiring, while we still understand that they have challenges. And so our job is really to act as an agent to sort of understand that, learn and cultivate a new form of architecture and urbanism that improves on their own way of building. And I think there's a lot to learn when you look at it locally, but when you also look at it regionally. And regionally means that let's say, the more industrialized parts of the world, looking at the less industrialized parts of the world to, again, unlearn some of the things that we've taken for granted, whether it's simple ways of dealing with the buildings and the environment. Our buildings are so hermetically sealed and, so alienated from people. And while, we need to even understand basic things that we always learned in sun directions, very simple things, materials, local materials. I mean, we say these things as though they are, it's somewhat cliche, but they remain incredibly important. They remain incredibly important.
And I guess, John, that's the same for the Earth Bauhaus, this local dimension plus the social. Is that also built into the Bauhaus that you're working with now?
No, absolutely, because the new European Bauhaus, which is created by Ursula von der Leyen as a project by the Commission, and which is in a way a co-evolution with Bauhaus Earth, has three dimensions. Sustainable, of course, we all subscribe to sustainability these days, inclusive and beautiful, by the way. I believe in beauty, and I believe that beauty can actually help to save the world. So yes, it's included. I 100% agree, first of all, with Kunle on vernacular sort of way of building cities, houses, entire landscapes, actually. The only thing that is different today is that we do not have the time for try and error, so to speak. You cannot experiment for 100 years with the shape of a roof, and when you find, because of precipitation change, it doesn't work anymore. Now we have to actually create new vernacular communities where people in Canada maybe adopt lessons from Kalimantan on Borneo on using bamboo constructions, for example. So we have to create, through the internet more or less, new vernacular communities, where old materials, where cliche construction, so to speak, picturesque construction may be the solution to a local challenge. So that's my first remark. The second is that we have a unique opportunity today, because when we shifted in the Industrial Revolution to steel and concrete and so on, we neglected the old materials we have used for 6,000 centuries to build our cities, So where is clay and timber and bamboo and many other things. And they have a unique property, and people are still not aware of it. Plants, forests, grasses, bushes, turn our atmospheric garbage, CO2, into precious raw materials. And this is not only having a value, because you can build a beautiful school floating in the Gulf of Guinea or whatever, you can also have it as a carbon sink. So in a way, we have a solution at hand. It's a natural solution. If we just turn back to regrowing regenerative materials, like we turn to the sun and wind for our energy instead of using fossil energies, we can, as a side effect, repair the atmosphere. But in order to do that, I think, and that was your first question, or cardinal question, so to speak, I mean, the Industrial Revolution for 2 centuries has made the modern world, but it is also going to destroy the modern world. It is like that. So because what happened in early capitalism, it's only the short-term profit, of course, because you extract the fossil fuels. It's like a gold rush economy we had for 200 years now, and you forget about the long-term well-being. That's called ignore the externalities. If you include the externalities, the complete picture is changing. And here, as I said, there is hope. I told you there's only a 20% according to my calculations, but we have a very good hope. The alternative, the material alternative to conventional construction, using timber, for example, can come already today at almost the same cost as conventional one. This is completely different when we had the renewable energy revolution in the 1990s. At that time, I recall very well that Angela Merkel, the former German chancellor, whom you know well and whom I have advised for 20 years, said on TV that renewable energies in Germany will never cover more than 4% of the power generation, 4%. But at that time, solar energy was 100 times as expensive as from coal-powered fire station. Today, of course, they are even cheaper, but we have to go a very long way. When you do timber construction, even for high-rise buildings today, your extra cost is maybe only 5 or 10%. It is like that. So we are at the tipping point already, and this is a very good hope. But we have to do it now, and I would say every city which has responsible decision makers, Stockholm, Copenhagen, and so on, all the public competitions and so on should include the best building is not the cheapest one, the best building is the one that stores most of the carbon, actually. This should be the priority. So sustainability first, profit second.
So it's about tenders, it's about procurement, it's about pricing externalities, as you also mentioned.
Procurement,
and sometimes also putting the requirements and the regulations up there. How does that sound to you, Kunle? I know that you work both out of Europe, but you also work out of Africa. With these kind of things, would that be sort of, that's just what they talk about there in the already industrialized countries? It's sort of a luxury take on things, or how do you see it?
Yeah, well, maybe I should answer that question by addressing a point that John made. I think it's in our sort of curve of development, particularly on the African continent and perhaps other parts of the global south. I believe that there's got to be room for experimentation. We still need to keep that space open because of exactly your point. That's, I think our approach currently is to essentially copy solutions that are for very different environments. And we've seen now, we're beginning to see, at least I hope within groups like this, that is not a sustainable approach. Of course, there are ideas that we can learn, and there's a need for cross-pollination. But generally, you come to an environment and you say, "Oh, this is great. Let's just bring that material and build." It makes that's a path that has actually led us to forget these local materials that we have within our own resources, because we haven't had the opportunities to actually push, whether it's a clay technology or the timber, local timber. We have so much abundant resource of timber, bamboo, and so many materials in these regions. But we've abandoned those things. And we have to go through our curves of learnings and sometimes failures to really innovate those to a point where they would stand for our environment, for our own way of life, for our own type of architecture. And I think while at the same time ensuring that we're bringing in the relevant global technologies to improve it. So it's a mixture of local and global ideas, a real hybrid that I think would address sort of going forward. Now, how does that, how is that being adopted, let's say, locally in these regions? I think there's still a lot of expectations from people to simply just, especially decision makers, leaders, that, we want this very quickly, we just want it done, we want it fast, we want it, and so there's very little, it creates very little room for innovation. But, we have to keep, at least within the professional community, we really, really have to stand our ground to understand that that's the real path for development. So ultimately, we would have to go through our curve of learnings and some degree of trial and error, essentially.
So are you basically also saying where maybe for some decades, a lot of places in the world, including in Europe, sort of wanted to copy a kind of American lifestyle, and that was what many people were aspiring for, a special sort of notion of what is modern well-being and welfare. Are you saying that now also, for instance, at the African continent, there is a stronger self-assertiveness and to sort of be true to the local identity, local roots, that it's a cultural change happening, or?
Yes, that's what we're hoping for, and that's what I'm hoping a lot of my colleagues are moving towards, and also people from other parts of the world that have opportunities to work on the African continent. I think the approach is really to learn from the environment, learn from people that are already doing things. There's a lot of local knowledge, collective intelligence in these environments, even from everyday people. Not to just come with, oh yeah, I've done it in this world, I'm the expert, I know what it is, let's just bring it to Africa. I think there should be a sense of humility and understanding that we've been doing this for generations. Africa is one of the oldest civilizations in the world.
We all come from there.
There's a lot of intelligence that we've had, civilizations from Egypt, Mesopotamia, Egypt, in the Moors. There's so much that we've had, and I think even cities like Benin that have been there. That so many things have been lost. Our art, our culture. There's so much. It's such a rich environment that we should both ourselves as Africans, but also people that are coming to interact to, first of all, understand that this is a place rich of resources that we can learn from.
No, I fully agree, actually. When I was a young student, I traveled across all of Africa at a very low budget sort of level, and I was just completely flabbergasted by the architecture I sort of encountered in Algeria, for example, Timimoun, and went to Agadez in Niger, when you came to Nigeria, and so on, Cameroon. It's amazing. It's full of inventions, actually, and of solutions. So I think personally that the fight against climate change will be either won or lost in Africa, because it's Africa, another 2 billion people by the end of the century will adopt the European American way of construction, which is completely unfit actually for tropical climates, by the way, concrete and so on. Doesn't make any sense, but still it is adopted. If they do that, then game is over in my view. But if Africa takes the lead based on its extremely rich tradition, and we in Europe, for example, learn from Africa and other continents, when it can still work. So I have been saying this also to the European Commission many times. We need a direct coalition between Europe and Africa, not just on resources, in particular on cultural identity and cultural heritage and so on. So there's a huge, huge pool of solutions and experience, and the Europeans are still ignoring it.
So I was just about to say you ended on an almost positive note, but then you said, but they are still ignoring it. But just for both of you to round off this session before there will be a lunch break, if sort of in just 60 seconds each, you should sort of give sort of the essence of what you could advise architects for. I mean, we can talk about these things. There are really many nice intentions, but we also know that there are numerous obstacles and barriers out there that needs to be removed. What would be the most important message? John first and then Kunle.
I mean, the message is stop building for billionaires, start building for the planet and the people. And it can be done. I mean, you should be aware, you architects, urban planners, designers, you should be aware that you hold the key to sustainability in your hands. You have not even opened your hands yet, but stare at your hands.
Okay, very clear message.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think we do have the key, but others have the doors. So,
So that is a conundrum.
Very nice. And
So how to better align the two?
right. But the great thing is that we're all going into the same room, and so understanding, bridging that relationship between the door owners and the key holders is very, very key indeed.
We got it.
Double pun.
And I think with time we're all going to get there. And the fact is that the awareness, these kinds of forums, these kinds of bringing people together to share knowledge is very, very important. People from all over the world coming to share ideas. And essentially the most important thing is that we should have no fear, we shouldn't hold back to learn to think differently, to build differently, and hopefully to learn to live differently.
But Connie, let me share, if you allow me, a terrible joke with you, because Kunle, he just invented this beautiful keys and doors story. I will keep that in my talk, so wonderful. So it's co-creation, really, yeah? Wonderful. But let me share the terrible joke with you. In a sense, yeah, you mentioned time, in time. We have very little time left. You should leave this room, hopefully, with the sense of urgency. I mean, this is not a cliche. And let me always remind you of the man, it's a joke, who jumped off the top platform of the Empire State Building Am I falling to the ground? He passed the second floor and he said, so far everything went well.
So, not exactly an optimistic note, but I think that we had a lot of input from two people up here who are both trying to push the world in the right direction. Thank you very much, Kunle Adeyemi and John Schellnhuber.